Okay, I think we'll kick things off. I'm just going to do a little bit of housework at the moment, just to welcome everybody to the Flimwell Park Symposium. This was quite a big deal trying to get all these people who've joined the panel this morning. It's a really busy week for everybody, and it's hugely exciting. And I want to thank Nishat hugely for putting all this together, but also the panelists who you'll meet with some introductions shortly. Well, my name is Steve Johnson. I teach first year at the Bartlett, and I work with Unit 8, second and third year design as well. I'm the architect on two projects which this symposium is about. So what I would like to do is just introduce everybody to this project. And part of the point of today is to try to give an idea of what's been happening at the two sites in Flimwell, and open this up to a much broader discussion. Once people have seen what people are doing and what people would like to see happen, heard the discussions, then we can open this up to a Q&A session as well. But we are recording this, so it's going to go onto the Bartlett YouTube channel and the Bartlett Together website as well. So if there are people that you're aware of who aren't able to join us today, please let them know that it will be for people's viewing after this. So I'm just going to start with the slideshow, just to give an indication. These are questions that we put forward as a group of people, because the best thing to do is to think about the Flimwell projects. There are two of them, and we've been using one of them to a limited degree so far, and we've formulated some questions that we thought would be interesting to put forward, just to pop into people's minds. I'm sure everybody will have their own questions and answers, but the first one is, how could a genuine and ongoing relationship with the place, Flimwell teams and community help the Bartlett School of Architecture respond to the climate and ecological emergency? That is a huge one. That's why that's at the top. And this is quite a good opportunity to open up this discussion, because unlike Gordon Street and the Here East sites, which are obviously urban center city sites, Flimwell Park is a rural place. And it's in the middle of a protected landscape and on the edge of woodland. So what is possible out there opens things up quite a lot, quite a nice enhancement of what we can offer as a teaching institution and research. Two is, should the Flimwell projects also function as pure getaway space for students and staff? And we found that it is really quite valuable. On it, that alone is quite useful as a resource, because of the fact that people can get out of London, get away from the commute, and just dwell together and exchange ideas, or just relax. The third question is, are there prime activities that the place should be used for, as far as the Bartlett and UCL are concerned? And the fourth is, should Flimwell Park and the Woodland Enterprise Centre become a place, and this is very important, for cross-department and even cross-university collaboration? So this is a new world where we've got the Bartlett and UCL full of amazing minds and activities, research, teaching, but historically it's been divided up into silos, and we really need to start looking at ways to break these down and open up across university and between universities even. And Flimwell Park could be, and the Woodland Enterprise Centre could be, places where this could happen. So the plan for today is an introduction. So I'm going to go through a quick expose of the two sites to let people know what's there and what's to be done still. And then we'll have panel introductions. So it'd be great for each panel member just to explain who they are and what they're doing very briefly. And then sorry, that's coming before the slideshow of the place. And then the fourth one is the panel thoughts. So that's 2 minutes per member of the panel, like a mini Pechakucha. For those who are new to Pechakuchas, that's a short, very short blast of presentation, sometimes with visuals, sometimes just speech. So it'll be a combination of people just giving their 2 minutes of thoughts about the project. And then the final 20 minutes hopefully will be an open Q&A or discussion. We started this last night, and what was meant to be about a half an hour discussion quite quickly turned into an hour-long discussion, and we had to cut it off because we're quite keen to get off and have some dinner. And then hope I'll be able to describe some next steps. So could we go through it quickly? I've got an order here, just to save time. And if people could give a short introduction to who they are, that would be great.
Okay, hi, thanks Steve. I'm Blanche Cameron. I teach at the Bartlett School of Architecture and environmental design primarily, also green infrastructure and nature-based solutions. And then I work with UCL Sustainability on the Bloomsbury programme, and I'm working with Dusty Gage, the green infrastructure expert in residence on a UCL-wide green infrastructure network. Thank you.
Thanks, Blanche. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Davies. I teach at BMade, which is the Bartlett Manufacturing Design Exchange, and I'm part of the team at BMade helping develop our sustainable strategy.
Thanks, Tom. Luke?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks for the invite. Hi, everyone. My name is Luke Olson. I'm the Programme Director for the MEng Engineering Architecture Design Programme, which is an interdisciplinary, interdepartmental programme. And I'm also working at UCL East and exploring new design studio spaces in UCL East as well.
Thanks, Luke. Danielle?
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Danielle Perkis and I work at the Mechanical Engineering Department of UCL. I'm an architect, but I'm very interested in circular economies. So I currently work in a research group called the UCL Plastic Waste Innovation Hub, looking at material circular economies.
Okay. Breaking down silos already. Oh, nice. Thanks, Danielle. Farley?
Hi guys, I'm Farley. I'm an architect, but I also teach on the BSc architecture course at the Bartlett with Greg and Steve in Unit 8. So we did a project, we based the year first term 2 years ago now down in Flimwell as the first sort of adventures into the woods for the Bartlett. So we're continuing that work this year and hopefully kind of as an ongoing collaboration. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Farley. Peter?
Thanks, Steve. Hi there, I'm Peter Scully. I'm Programme Director for Design for Manufacture. I'm also Technical Director for the Bartlett Manufacturing and Design Exchange. And yeah, just as other people have said, that the real interest in Flimwell is just seeing such a huge unknown opportunity. We've got loads of things that we can project onto the space, but we don't really know what it's going to mean to us until we're out there and doing stuff. So really looking forward to the presentations today. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Peter. Greg?
Everyone, I have some very ropey internet, so if I cut out, apologies. Yeah, Farley's kind of already introduced me. Teach on the BSc in Unit 8 with Steve as well, and we kind of did our first foray into the woods at Flimwell a couple of years ago, and we're going to be continuing our unit based there this year as well.
Thanks, Greg. Negar?
Hi everyone, thanks Steve. I'm Negar. I'm currently a student at the Bartlett doing my 5th year, and I worked since 2019 with Architecture Education Declare and other collaborations they did with ACAN, Architecture Climate Action Network, and I experienced Flimwell 2 years ago for a trip, which I will talk more about it in this presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Negar. James?
Hey, morning everyone, and thank you, Steve. So my name is James Della Valle. I'm a former Unit 8 student at my undergrad with both Greg, Farley and Steve, going back to the Bartlett now. And my P1 was located in Flimwell during my 3rd year of studies that led on to my P2. So I'm looking forward to discussing that later.
James, thanks. Duncan?
Hello, so I'm Duncan Wilson. I'm from the Bartlett Centre for Advanced Spatial Analysis, and I'm setting up a new master's program called Connected Environments, which starts tomorrow. Yay! And I'm really interested in our connected environment. So we look at things like Internet of Things and sensors and how we can instrument and monitor our environment. And we've been doing over the past sort of 5 or 6 years various what we call living labs, which is deploying sensors around cities to monitor things, which I will talk a little bit about later.
Okay, thanks, Duncan. Alice was meant to join us, but she has fallen ill. So Tom Davies is on his own today. They were going to present as a pair, but unfortunately she's fallen ill. We had 2 more students as well who meant to join us, but students being students, some of them are working very hard doing their gap years and year outs, and one is in the Caribbean, so our time zone's just not lining up. But Rosie Murphy was very good about contributing some images for this show as well today. And Theo Tan as well. He's had to apologize because he's got a fair amount on at the moment. Okay, I'm going to quickly move on. This is a 5-minute expose of the Woodland Enterprise Centre in Flimwell. So these 2 projects date back for me as an architect about 20 years nearly. And they are southeast of London. So this is on the Kent, East Sussex border. So you can see on that line going up is London, to the south is Hastings. So it's in the middle of a patchwork of agriculture and forestry. These are the 2 institutions. So Flimwell Park on the right, which is still under construction, nearly finished, and the Woodland Enterprise Centre on the left. They link together. It's just the A21 road that splits the 2. Otherwise, they are almost a complete set of woodlands at about 50 hectares. This is the Woodland Enterprise Centre that's well managed, 15 years of management. So it's producing timber. So this is part of the draw that we've got. And one of the advantages we've got is that we've got this place that's up and running with workshops in it. Unit 8 and the Bartlett Student Forum have both camped on this site already while Flimwell Park was being built. But there's a set of buildings that are all usable. So UCL can use these buildings whenever we want. This is owned by a trust and East Sussex County Council. And it's a series of workshops going through the woodland. This is moving over to Flimwell Park. So if you remember that aerial view, we've got the 2 sites standing side by side. Structurally, they're different. The first one, the Woodland Enterprise Centre, as I mentioned, is East Sussex County Council and Woodland Enterprise Limited, a trust who run that and own it. Flimwell Park is owned by a family, father, mother, and 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter. And they've been building a mixed-use scheme on this site, again, next door to the Woodland Enterprise Centre. And what we're hoping to do on this site, as opposed to the WEC, which is mainly forestry and workspace, this one is we're trying to look at a different way of developing sustainably rural land, but land generally, because there are ramifications for cities in these projects as well. This is the site plan for Flimwell Park, so you can see a rough zoning of the site. The beige color, the khaki color, is the area where we're building and doing projects. The rest of the site is ancient woodland, so it has to be protected. These are some images of what is there. So it's overgrown. It's been left for 20 years without any sort of management happening with the woodland. The upper site was abandoned, and the one building that was standing there was badly damaged and damaged beyond repair. It's full of ponds. It was a bird park, so there were birds all over this site. That is what was a visitor center, later became a children's nursery. It was beyond repair. The steel frame of that building went down the road to build a barn. So this is what we're looking at when we started the project. This is the upper site. So this is where the buildings lie. So what we've got here, which really opens things up for the Bartlett UCL, is that we've got a large workshop, which you can see to the left. There's a restaurant on site, which is opening up tonight. I'm going down for the grand opening. We've got 8 small workshops. The Bartlett currently have 1 of those for a minimum of a year. So that's already a workspace on site. And then we've got student accommodation at the top of the site. And that's what really makes it quite magical for both sites, is it enables us to be able to stay on this site for extended periods of time. There are also 5 houses on the site, so there will be people living on the site. This is the main workshop, so this is what we're looking at for the Bartlett. It's next door to the restaurant. This is the layering of it, so teaching space, some of it double height space, and then 2 stories, and then a food production greenhouse on top. So the site is becoming a place where food can be grown and managed along with fuel, creating timber for materials and fuel. So it's trying to keep it, as Danielle said, it's trying to keep these closed loops so that we can reduce waste, maximize energy, make use of everything, all of the waste on the site, try to set up a system where nothing leaves the site. So this was a first recce by the Bartlett faculty. It was a faculty away day, staff away day, where the site was just beginning to be constructed. The old visitor center was just a covered shed, so it just kept the rain off people's backs. I'm quickly going to go through the remainings of this, just talking about or showing you what we've got. So on the bottom right, you can see the 3 houses are starting to go up. 8 small workshops, so they're full of business. Some of them are designer makers. Then we've got a bicycle shop and a restaurant in the bottom left. You can just see it. The big workshop to the right of the image in the bottom left. And then you can see the restaurant with the 2 small houses, bottom left. Top right is the inside of the large workshop. So this is potentially an assembly hall working with Gordon Street and Here East. So things could be made in London and sent out here, or they could be made on site at the 2 Flimwell venues. But you can see in the bottom right, that's the big workshop and the restaurant side by side. So those are the smaller workshops. Number 8, which you see just about in the middle, is where our Bartlett base camp is. And they're all accessed by a gantry that runs on the edge of the woodland. So very much looking at the woodland as a resource. And this is one of the contingents from Design for Manufacture, doing some early 3D scans of part of the site within the woodland, where we're looking to set up some projects this year. The first projects will be manufactured and built on site. So that's me, that's my 5 minutes. We'll move on to Greg and Farley, talk about, you've got about 15 seconds per slide.
Steve, maybe if you drive, you'll force me to stop talking. But I'm going to keep it very simple. We've got a few slides just with some of the work that we did a couple of years ago, where we were asking our students to try and construct some experiments in the woods. It was quite a loose brief, but it was centered around this idea of trying to log or capture or record a kind of phenomena that is not readily or easily witnessed. So the students kind of did all sorts of things. Next slide, please. And we kind of just compiled a few quotes just to kind of summarize, I guess, how they found it. So in their words rather than in ours. So from Natalia, the conversation with experts outside of architecture, foresters, ecologists. Oh, sorry, Steve, I missed that. And could you mind going back a slide, Steve? Sorry.
And another one?
Yeah,
I think it's the one with Christine.
It might just be slow loading for me. I'll talk to this one. So it's jumping around a bit. So the conversation with experts outside of architecture, foresters, ecologists was extremely enriching. Having the impetus to collaborate and work beyond the studio also created much healthier conditions for study. And this is kind of really important for us because that was a real kind of ambition. It's like, how do we get outside of the studio? How do we get outside of the Bartlett? And hopefully some of the conversations later will relate to that, because it's like, you know, if we're really going to engage with our environment, I think we need to spend more time in it. We can't just be designing in the studio. Next slide, please, Steve. So in confronting us with the realities of designing, manufacturing and deploying installations in unfamiliar terrain, Flimwell was my formative experience at the Bartlett. So that was kind of Matty talking about how being forced to kind of design in a physical space kind of was a real kind of eye-opener for him. Again, building on that kind of discussion around, as designers, how much can we do in the studio? And here, the challenge of having to deploy a project on site led us to advance our technical skills at a really fast pace. So by the end of term 1, we had already developed structural and technological strategies for our building projects. This was really important. So Steve, as our kind of technical tutor, I think you could talk to this later, really saw this kind of leap that happened because the students had already began engaging with some of those technical challenges. And then here, the unique experience fosters an expansion of our practical purview beyond unfounded speculation for giving representation. So here, Matty quite directly talking to the fact that as students, you know, sometimes we can draw things and it's easy to draw things, but it's a lot harder to actually make them on site. And everyone in the unit supported and learned from each other. The shared experience encouraged us to cooperate, proving the value in close collaboration, which we then benefited from throughout the year. So it was really the beginning of a very closely knit unit, which continued to kind of collaborate and work together for the whole year. And then this quote just to finish from Anna, the program director of the BSc, who came to the on-site crit we had at the end of the term and really enjoyed the experience. Said students engaged with their projects at a different scale at Flimwell. The site allowed ideas to be tested with unpredictable outcomes. Careful craft and untamable concepts really brought the projects to life. So yeah, hopefully that's given a little bit of a flavour of what we did a couple of years ago and what we'll be doing again this year.
Farley, do you anything to add to that?
No, I think we're probably tight on time, so happy to press on, Steve. Thanks, Greg.
Okay. Peter.
Thanks very much, Steve. So yeah, the first slide would be good. Yeah, so I'm technical director for design for manufacturing. Design for manufacturing is really about, if we can understand what materials, processes, people, time want to do, then perhaps we can make designs that are sensitive and empathetic to those. So and remembering that we started this year in lockdown, and of course with manufacturing and the title in lockdown is challenging. It's challenging at the best of time, but this year is particularly challenging. So our approach was really to look at how we could work around a measurable architecture. So an anagamma kiln, very loose start to the program, really looking at what does this look like before we start detailing it. So we're really looking at putting an anagamma kiln and roof structure at the site at Flimwell, really trying to be consistent with the values of what we consider the philosophies of Flimwell. But as Steve said earlier, really trying to make as most use of every aspect of material and value that we've got. So we start looking at how do we start using the trees to make a roof? How do we really understand thermal flows in combustion? And how do we try and capture as much of that heat generated as possible? And this is a wood burning kiln, and as such, it's consuming fuel. Can we, through design, try to make the most efficient use of that energy as we possibly can? And then moving on, so this is one of the parts. It's by a student called Peng Zhang, who's designed and built a high efficiency heat exchanger in the chimney. So all waste heat is transferred into oxygenated air that is going to be pumped into the front of the kiln to increase the heat yield from this. And this is designed around a tetrahelix. And so, you know, that former for the middle of the kiln that we can see in there is made out of waste pallets. And then it's a very simple catenary arch with about 300 millimeters of insulation, all built at Here East. And this is a dry build assembly that we're going to be installing down in Flimwell in the month of October. So lots of bricklaying, lots of geometry. How do we make this thing inherently strong by design? How do we make it inherently usable by design? And just, again, it's just capturing that heat, but also designing it so it doesn't need experts or deep knowledge to be able to build it. How do we dump complexity into the design so that assembly is simple? That's a really key part of it. Here we can see the beginnings of the skin to be formed in a aluminium stretching deformation method. So about 300 millimeters of insulation. And it's about time we started insulating our architectures, as the M25 protest said yesterday. But how can we do that by design? Beginnings of roof exploration. The purpose of the roof is really to create an area for wood to dry and to be an architectural space in the woods. How do we make this a destination that people want to be in? So lots of visual programming, Grasshopper. You know, how do we make the design itself work with the behaviors of the materials that are going to go onto it? So a grid-like structure, it's a mixture of a quad mesh and some triangulation in there, using screw piles to go down into the ground. So this is absolutely a no concrete structure. And here what we're doing is dumping all the complexity into the cords, the long bits of wood. So those are 5-axis robot machined elements, whereas the nodes themselves are just 3+2 axis machining. So again, we're looking to design things that exploit what materials and processes want to do, rather than a design forcing its will onto unwilling materials. Beginnings of panels that are going to be made. The actual roof structure is going to be in the region of, it's an equilateral triangle in plan, 7 meters by 7 meters, covering the kiln. And so here we can see some of the nodes, some of the cords, and so here are some of the students leaving.
Sorry, Peter.
No, not at all. Here are some of the students leaving the site. And I just think a big congratulations for a group of students that have started in lockdown and have hit the ground running. They're an amazing bunch.
Peter, thank you very much for that. Hope the slide's getting a bit smoother. Luke, you want to talk about MMG? A lot going on.
Yes, indeed. I'm going to start by talking a bit of the past, my past. I was the program director for short courses at the AA, the place down the road, and indeed the Woodland across the valleys. And we ran 5-day, 10-day short courses, summer make lab, loci make, where we effectively would select a tree, cut it down, put it through the wood miser, and make one-to-one architecture. And the premise really was to sort of test ideas through making, collaborative making, usually with students and experts that we'd bring in, but also to try and fulfill some need in the forest. So this was actually they needed a viewing location at one point. So this was a viewing deck, but they also needed space for having a cigarette while it was raining. So we had a sort of dual function of cigarette with a view locator. But also this sort of more collaborative thing of, having seats that could go around a campfire, for example, allow you to lean back and look at the stars, which this theme was all about. Voyager, looking at the time Voyager just left the solar system, at the furthest man-made object in space. But these ideas sort of fused through a lot of projects. This is over a period of 7 years, and I worked with the design and make team as well, using the sort of material to sort of reimagine how we could inhabit the forest. This is a nice design and make cocoon project. Or looking at the trees and sort of, actually trying to design a time machine. I mean, a tree in itself is a form of a time machine. It contains so much information about the ecological and climate change that's happened over time. And I think that examination of trees and time is key. Or indeed making dangerous dwellings, anything built by students at the sort of unskilled end of things, so that at the end of 2 weeks you can safely exist in something that would feel dangerous, was the brief. So we like health and safety reports and so on in these short courses. Something I really wanted to raise was this connection with local craft and local makers. There's some extraordinary knowledge outside these sites. And this is Peter Suttle. He's a steam bender and extraordinaire, Lord of the Rings, as he sometimes calls himself. And he has this ability to just make extraordinary steam bent and non-metal fixings. So we bring in the experts on this particular form of joinery, and they would engage in the class as well. So it was a very much a collaborative approach with local craftsmen. And that just brought a really interesting sense of learning new skills, new knowledge, but also bending the rules, doing things that they wouldn't dream of doing themselves. And sort of, this was a chair we designed with Jim Torrey, who's a steam bender there. And he would never make something like that, but he was very happy to make something like that for this project. Or basket weaving. We'd bring in someone who's a great deal of knowledge of various basket weaving, where they said everything is a basket, which I think is interesting when you talk to people, craftsmen, who see things through the detail and understand it in a kind of more conceptual level as well. And these were spaces we bent the trees to form a cabana. Or music. We had giant sized musical instruments. These guys are like soothsayers. They come out of the forest having made Aeolian harps and things out of various found objects, and are delighted to take part in a kind of one-to-one making project. But we also like this connection between the high tech and low tech. So we did series of courses on MakeLab using digital technologies, so spatial robotic locators, which would connect to a digital project. So we could draw something in 3D and then use the pointers to, so myself and Jeroen and Brendan, Carlin did a series of projects relating to this connection between the sort of high-tech and low-tech approach. I know we've only got 2 minutes, so I'm going to squeeze the last sort of few seconds to talk about the MEng and where we're looking to use Flimwell. Obviously, the really exciting part is the expertise that we bring from CEG and IED. This was our away day. Jose, the head of CEG, joined us, and Dan, the head of IED, joined us, obviously, for the 2 days. And the potential for this site really became apparent just by being there, you know, as a test bed for ideas, but actually as a means of really understanding, exploring the potential for creative and open-ended projects to resolve some of the really challenging, complex, sustainable issues that we're facing. So we've got two approaches, year 2 this year, with Graham heading 5 studios are looking to use Flimwell as a test bed for projects that they're developing for a project on the Camden High Line. And also in year 3 and 4, Simon Beams and Salam and Harry Betts are joining forces to make a studio that actually does look at how we can use Flimwell as a site for projects to be developed as well. So seeding cities. So I think that's it. The last slide I just wanted to put in there to demonstrate that this really is an extraordinary opportunity for integration, you know, cross department, cross skills. But I think that idea of using the space for long-term evaluation is really important too. So we can sort of set the place up to test ideas over a longer period of time than is typical. So I think that's the last point I'll make on that.
Luke, that was great. Really nice to see other projects being made in other places as well. It's shows what excitement that we've got ahead of us. James, moving on, modest number of slides here. So this is a really interesting project that I'm going to let James try to.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. I mean, feel free to flick through the slides. There's no sort of particular running order, but yeah, coming from this sort of reiterating both sort of Farley and Greg, obviously my tutors in Unit 8, and Steve with tech. Kind of what I wanted to bring to the conversation was that as a student at the Bartlett in undergraduate level, you very rarely have sort of the time to visit the site more than once, and you sort of have this sort of a very helicopter approach to design where you're, you know, sort of predominantly stuck in the studio per se, looking at the site through Google Maps, and actually at sort of what Unit 8 was doing, sort of pioneering this idea of going to the site, inhabiting the site, you know, staying a couple of nights on the site, and then being able to revisit the site, and then proposing sort of this installation structure, which I built during my P1 studies, was sort of the first chance to actually get to know your site sort of very intimately as a designer. And you know, you had that time-based parameter, and you sort of could experience and develop your designs in a different way to that of just sort of sitting there on Google Maps as such. And kind of what really interested me about Flimwell was this idea of then using timber, which then led into sort of further projects and further my P2 studies, which then was brought into Chicago, which was my P2 site. But kind of sort of more of a note on that was that finding my interest through sort of timber construction, and sort of what I was interested in predominantly was sort of automated robotic milling of sort of timber fabrication, was sort of further as Flimwell develops as both a centre for UCL and the students. Is, you know, if it was up to me, I wouldn't have actually left Flimwell. I would have done my whole P1 just sort of staying on site, just camping there and using the workshop. So sort of at the time I was sort of flicking between Gordon Street and the sort of facilities at BMaid, and then going back to the site and then sort of evaluating the design at the time, or sort of recalculating measurements, etc. But what would be really nice sort of as we progress as students and as this sort of facility of UCL sort of develops, is actually this sort of ability for students to stay on the site to conduct and build their full projects there as well, which I think is a very, very unique experience, especially at the undergraduate level and from what I've experienced previously in my architecture studies. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely loved my time there, and the projects came out sort of exactly as I wanted.
Thank you, James. Very good to see a project. Spend an hour talking about that one. Is a really lovely project. Sorry, I'm being a very bad timekeeper here. Can move on. Blanche, you wanted a couple of minutes to make some.
Sorry, Steve.
Sorry, Blanche. Yeah, you go ahead.
Yeah. I think I asked. Probably I'm going to speak without slides, and then Negar's
Okay.
going to take on with the slides and show what happened a couple of summers ago. But thanks anyway. If you want to take the slides down for a bit, just sort of more direct to sort of people to talk, I guess. Yeah, thanks very much for asking me to speak, Steve. I think what is the question I would probably ask for the symposium is, how can the woods help us respond to the climate and ecological emergency and social and environmental justice issues? Very important. But I think there's another further question as well, which is how can we benefit the woodlands? And I think what is the specific difference about this location than working in a car park or working at Here East? And obviously the answer to that is that you're in the woods. And those woods basically are a new form of teaching context for us, but they are also teachers. So I think the things that I wanted to just get across today probably are things like Vandana Shiva saying, everything I needed to know I learned in the forest, unpacking that. What does that mean? What can we learn from woodland ecology? And how can that help us respond to our ecological extractive systems at the moment? Because basically what we do is look at what we can take, what we could take from the woods or we could take from each other and build something with it. Whereas I think there's some interesting correlation with the symbiosis aspect of a relationship with woodland. And I came up with a little acronym for forest, and the F standing for fairness, the O standing for openness, the R standing for respect, the E for ecology, the S for stewardship, and the T for truth. And I think maybe that could be an interesting kind of starting point for discussing in a bit just what we can bring and how it relates to that learning that we need to do at the moment. So the Bartlett declared an emergency 2 years ago, driven by Architecture Education Declares, you know, the now worldwide student movement for change in architectural education. So this is a wonderful opportunity to look at working at Flimwell, and obviously the examples of working with timber is very interesting. I think probably what's important is understanding what is there. As with all projects, you know, you start with a site assessment, understanding, a deep understanding of what is there. And perhaps one requirement of each activity at Flimwell would be to ask within each brief or activity to describe what benefit that activity was bringing to the woodlands and to people locally, as that's part of the local ecosystem, understanding what's there. And then thinking about how our activities could help with the regenerative aspect of facing the climate and ecological emergency. So there's mitigation, there's adaptation to climate impacts, and there's ecological regeneration. And I think this is where Flimwell can really make a difference. These are ancient woodlands that have been left for 20 years by whoever, not managed, with various impacts. And I think that's a very interesting context to be working in too. And I'm sure students would love to understand more about the mycology of woodlands, the wet woodland ecosystems, how water is cycled. You know, we're learning more about how woodlands speak to each other through the vegetation, the mycorrhizal fungi in the soils. You know, do people know that the Amazon rainforest creates rain when it needs it by releasing chemicals? How interesting. And this is the tip of the woodland iceberg, if you like. So it's very interesting to see what's being proposed. I just think it's a really vital question to ask. Where are we now with the woods, with each other, our relationship to the changes that the Bartlett is making, responding to student calls for change, and doing it in a sensitive and ecological way. I'll just finish with the Bartlett declaration. that, as you know, as most students will know, a lot of declarations were made, but putting it into practice is a challenge. But I think that there is a strong opportunity for us to do that there, with an ecological, ethical drive, which is what the declaration said. And a final reminder about parity, because not all students will be able to access Flimwell, and that London is also a forest. And in fact, in the 2019 ITRI assessment of London, you know, almost 50% of London is green space, and in fact is classified perfectly naturally as a forest because of its woodland cover or its tree cover. So let's not forget Epping Forest, Waltham Forest, and other places in London where we can also explore, because nature isn't outside the city. And getting away from the studio doesn't mean that we necessarily have to travel a long way. It might be around the corner. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Blanche, very much. Great thoughts. I'm just going to go back to the slideshow again. Okay, Negar, I've put up a whole load of slides just to
That's great.
just to remind you of what wonderful an event this was. So this was organized by the students, but assisted by Blanche and myself for a weekend. So Negar, go right ahead.
Yes, so, well, I'm just going to be really quick in sharing my experience in this trip, which we, as a group of students, went 2 years ago. And I think, yeah, and unfortunately, Rosie and Theo, who are meant to be in this panel, couldn't join us, so I will share some of their ideas too. The trip was really inspiring in so many ways. And I guess one of the main reasons was that it was organized, as you, Steve, mentioned, by students, for students, and assisted by both you and Blanche. And one of the main reasons for the trip was to explore how can we shift existing architecture education system and structures and try to think more about ecology and an environment, and engage with it with a sense of responsibility. So the trip was packed with a lot of activities, such as, you know, hands-on workshops on woodworking and forestry, but also acted as a really nice getaway where we enjoyed cooking and sharing meals together, as well as watching films on the screen and going for long walks in the forest and getting to know the area. But what was really interesting was that through all these kind of supposedly mundane activities, it sparked a lot of interesting and inspiring conversations around climate change, race and class inclusivity, and collaboration in our architecture education and practice. So as a student, I guess after this experience, we were really excited about the opportunities that Flamewell can provide for more cross-disciplinary collaboration with different experts and also universities across London, where we can share knowledge and learn from each other beyond conventional architecture education structure that at the moment exists. So it's really interesting to also open this up to the floor today to think about different ways we can engage with Flimwell and how can we challenge the existing structures at the moment.
This was a final slide I put in just showing this extraordinary achievement where the students had built a cinema in the middle of the woods. And if I could have mounted a video on here, I would have. It was a wonderful, wonderful thing to see a Werner Herzog film shown in the middle of the Flimwell woods. But also Rosie Murphy really beautifully organized these wonderful tents that were suspended from the trees to reduce the impact on the forest floor. So this showed the real capabilities of the student group, that we could just walk out of this and they would create a world of their own. I'm just going to switch over now to, if I can, another presentation. So this is going to be Tom's show. Sorry about this. Okay. Can everyone see that?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay, sorry, Tom.
That's fine. I'm happy to start. I'll start now. And
Hey, go ahead, start, Tom.
yeah.
I'll try to get your slides up as soon as possible. Sorry.
That's fine. Yeah. So I'm going to talk very quickly about a proposed project that I've been working on with Alice Huell, and also Steve, Blanche, and Peter have been very helpful in offering us guidance along the way. So, as I mentioned earlier, I work for in a department called BMADE, the Bartlett Manufacturing Design Exchange. We are non-course specific, so the workshop's open to anyone within the Bartlett. So we have been working with just taking into account the points raised by the Architecture Education Declares Forum, and also BSAS, the Bartlett Student Society, on some of the points they've raised about sustainability and education. So if we go back to slide 2, Steve, that might, if that's all right.
Is that the one?
A couple more. One more.
Sorry, Tom.
Yeah, there we go. So basically, we are proposing to put on an annual series of events, and this is just a proposal, to be clear, to put on an annual series of events focusing on sustainable and regenerative making skills. So obviously, we're in a workshop environment. We want to focus on like the technical making skills, and we are hoping to do this at Flimwell. So as Blanche has already, well, as everyone's talking about, and Blanche in particular, we really one of the key focuses of this is to really respect the site. We don't want to go down there and make a mess. So we want to make sure that this is integral to everything that we do. So for the beginning, we're proposing to have this open to Bartlett students and staff. And we're interested in the idea of training staff, and certain practitioners we've approached are also interested in that idea, and we think it could be an interesting approach as to having staff and students learning together. We'll focus on materials such as earth building, turf, straw bale, timber frame, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. And we're also really keen, similar to what's been mentioned before, about engaging with the local community of practitioners. Eventually, we might go further afield, but it'd be nice to see what's around the Flimwell area as well. So that's very, very briefly. As I say, it's a proposed project. It's something we're quite excited about, and if anyone's got any ideas or questions, definitely get in touch.
Tom, thanks very much for that. That was a really nice thing to hear a bit more about. Yeah, wonderful. Danielle, are you ready to go?
Sorry, I just couldn't find the unmute button there. Hi, everyone. I just want to say, because I don't know how long I've got and if we're overrunning, but I'll do a kind of quick, brief run through of sort of
2-3 minutes, Danielle.
Okay, good. Okay. So I mentioned in my introduction that I'm part of a group called the Plastic Waste Innovation Hub, and it's sort of an interdisciplinary research group that look at material circular economies. And my sort of journey into that, from practicing as an architect and then re-entering the world of academia and academic institutions, and learning about on the ground from very different people, different perspectives, the challenges that we face of how we change our kind of embedded linear models of take, make, waste to this different circular system where we try and retain the value of materials when you might say they're at the end of their service life or the end of their useful life. And we reuse those materials in some way, whether it's in the same system that created them or in other systems, so that you could see spiraling other connected systems of material use. And I guess the things, I suppose the perspective that I could share with you all, which might be useful for a forum like this, is to say that the changes that we need to make, it's really across the board. Holistically, we need to change all sorts of things about the way that we think, make, and communicate. And I suppose from sort of drawing on from what people in the group have already said today, I think that there's a really positive message about the creative exploration that has already started at Flimwell. You're fostering a really positive exploration of these questions, and really that is the best approach at the moment, to be taking energy and interest and a spirit of exploration to actually try and tackle some of these very nitty-gritty, difficult issues. And I think the other thing I wanted to sort of touch upon is Blanche mentioned very eloquently about the importance of context when you talk about sustainability. And I think that understanding or showing a sensitivity towards the context of a particular material or process is really, really important, because if you take one material or process and you insert it into a different context, you might have different outputs and different environmental impacts. So context is incredibly important when you're thinking about how to approach sustainable design. But I guess the other sort of wider issue, and it sort of slightly touches on a bit of what Peter has talked about, I think maybe what Duncan is talking about in terms of the sort of data collection, data analysis, is that I think we're at a stage where we're trying to learn about the impacts that we create, and we're sort of playing this game of catch up at the moment, where we have certain techniques for data collection about material impact or environmental impact of processes. And we are very much at a stage where people are sort of real time trying to make sense of it, and therefore to give recommendations about what could be a better solution or a better process or a better material. So it is quite a tricky time to say definitively if one process is better than another. I think it always has to come back to using the method of data collection that we can access. And if we don't have the most sensitive data collection method, perhaps Duncan's got some amazing ideas about how we could actually create a different set of metrics in order to understand the impacts of these things. So, and I think the other thing that I was sort of drawing on inspiration from what Peter has been talking about was about what manufacturing or what materials want to do, how things want to be created using those, and understanding or sensitivity to those processes. And I think that the sort of, I suppose the messages that I would like to try and emphasize is that manufacturing, use, disposal, all of these processes and the way that we make materials, they're very much sitting within this other infrastructure, which is the sort of standardization, the policy, the kind of legal framework of how things get made. And you can see that if you look at a piece of sheet material, it might be wood, it might be metal, it might be plastic. If you have a little look at some of the metadata attached to that thing in the workshop, you start to see that there's a sort of story behind it. Where did it come from? Why is it dictated to be that size, that thickness? Why is it made in that particular way, in that particular mix of plastics or polymers? And you start to see that, in fact, we're designing within a bigger infrastructure of rules and regulations. And I would really like to see that people using Flimwell could actually sort of trace this amazing material and process exploration, but trying to sort of expand their knowledge and their sensitivity about what are the other factors or the agents that affect those processes. Because if we can get designers to sort of pinpoint those and think, oh, okay, there's a rule there that creates this thing, which creates waste, which creates a problem at the end of life when you're trying to recycle something. If we can sort of make that beautiful magic thread of knowledge, then I think that we can really start to affect some real change to actually change processes and materials towards more circular, or towards circularity. So I guess I'm really interested as Flimwell as a case study to do all of those things, and to try and be a kind of case study where we explore and allow students and tutors to kind of reevaluate the systems they already have that they perhaps don't see and they don't understand. So in I suppose a very obvious way, looking at what already happens in the site. If we actually look at what happens on the site, so the kind of inputs, the outputs, the things that affect those inputs and outputs, and those maybe those unseen influences, I think that would be a really positive start to driving circular economy education.
This is great, Daniel. I'm going to have to hand over now to Duncan.
Thanks.
We've got about 5 minutes left.
Yeah,
sorry about that.
No problem.
Really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely awesome comments from everyone so far. So I'm just going to end with a question, actually, or the thing that I'm thinking about in this conversation. So I'm an engineer and maker. I'm interested in measuring things and data, and I apologize for that, but I don't really. I'm kind of interested in how we can do, particularly how we can do longitudinal monitoring, so monitoring over the long time. So as an example, we've been counting the number of bats that are in the Olympic Park since 2017 on a 24/7 basis, because bats might be a good proxy indicator species for the biodiversity of that environment. And we could be using camera traps, we could be using audio streams, we could be using activity counts, lots of different ways that we can sort of measure things. So here's the question. What I'm interested in is kind of, often we look back, I think, over the past 5 years and say, that worked. Yeah, when we're talking about trying to make the environment better, or trying to look at sustainability activities. What I'm kind of interested in is, what are the kind of things that we can measure on a weekly or monthly basis to try and help us understand that we're heading in the right direction? The more and more I ask that question to people, the fewer and fewer answers I get to that question. And I think it's really hard. So I think it is something that we actually need to try and think about. What are those things that we could measure to put onto the quarterly reports, the monthly reports, onto the P&L accounts? And I'll end there.
Okay, that is great questions, Duncan. We'd probably spend a half an hour answering each one of those. We're hoping to get a larger Q&A session in here, but we're running up against time, I'm afraid. But that was an extraordinary salad of thoughts and experiences going into this first discussion. Can't emphasize that enough. This is the first discussion really since the two projects have come online. I've got a few questions here. Which Bartlett disciplines, degree programs interact with Flimwell projects at Flimwell Park? Those can be any or every. We've got a year to divide up, so it's set up so that people can book time in to the place. So this first year definitely is going to be an experimental year, but it's open for use to everybody at the Bartlett, UCL, engineering. We want to try to cut across disciplines. The proposed Be Made regeneration project seems to me a critical avenue of cross-disciplinary training for UCL students to meet the ecological crisis as mentioned. Will MArch P12 students be able to get involved with the first semester? Hopefully so. You need to speak with your program directors about that. Julie's asked, what were the drivers behind the Flimwell Park buildings shapes competing with Woodland, to sum that up, and provide a habitat for humans to stand and work side by side with a very interesting site. Seb has asked, is timber production being carried out in the Woodland? Yes, it is, but it's part of a management program. So landscape, architecture, other departments will be able to get involved in this. We've already started discussions on that. Will the strategies of the Woodland being designed to align with ecological concerns? Absolutely. We've got huge water flows coming through the site. We took on, Flimwell Park was a dead site. The Woodland Enterprise Center had been pulverized by a hurricane the year before they started the new woodland management plan. So both of those sites are really open for people to look in the ways that Danielle's talking about, that Duncan, we're all talking about. How do you work with ancient woodland in a lively area? They're working woodlands. That's very important. They're meant to be generating habitat and resources. So these are great questions, really enchanting to read these. And this is just the beginning of a discussion. The next plan is to try to set up a Flimwell forum where we can get people, including all the people who took part today, and assemble that into an open online discussion about what can happen at these two places. So you've seen some really wonderful events that have already happened. Really wonderful work. Wouldn't have been done just on the back of Flimwell Park. They were done because Gordon Street and Here East also exist. But for anybody who's new to the Bartlett or new to Flimwell Park, this is the very beginning of this. Don't feel like you've missed out on anything, because not many people have actually taken advantage of it so far, just the very intrepid ones. So I'd like to stop there. This is really, really helpful, and I hope people got what they came for out of this session. I'd like to thank everybody again very much for taking time out of a busy week to take part. And thanks again to Nishat as well for putting the time in to help organize this. And I think that's it. Thanks, everyone. And the conversation will continue.